calling this presentation sort of feisty fair use in computer-generated works because I'm sort of reprising an argument I made what feels like a million years ago about the connection between fair use and an old case, but a great case called Feist v. Rural Telephone Company. So back in 2015, I wrote this little blog post about the Google Books decision and how Google Books was a fair use case, but it was a fair use case through the lens of this Feist opinion, which is an opinion about telephone books. So what does fair use and Google Books have to do with telephone books? Feist is the case that, you know, if you study copyright, you take your intro to copyright law class in law school, Feist is the case about the fact expression dichotomy. And this is kind of part of the soul of that decision. It's Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, and she says, the mere fact that a work is copyrighted does not mean that every element of the work may be protected, right? So copyright protects a work, but copyright works protected by copyright, or encumbered, as I like to say, contain all sorts of elements that are not protected by copyright. So copyright assures authors the right to their original expression, but actually encourages others to build freely upon the ideas and information conveyed by a work. This is the fact expression dichotomy. And it's kind of, in a way, it's a real heart and soul of what libraries do. We have all these copyright protected works in our buildings, but people come to us in part because inside those copyrighted works are facts and ideas, which are actually free. And once someone reads them in a book or in a database or wherever we provide access to them, they have them. And as the founder of my institution said, they're free and they belong to the person. They don't belong to anyone. And the person who now has the idea or the fact can go off and use it for their own purposes. This result is neither unfair nor unfortunate, Justice O'Connor goes along to say. It is the means by which copyright advances progress of science and art. So the fact that I can go to the library, I can read, for example, you know, sort of an extraordinary factual, you know, story about something that happened and be inspired to take those facts and go and write a play based on that, right? Or go and write my own little essay about how it made me feel. Right? All of that is great. That's what copyright wants us to do. It wants me to encounter facts and ideas in the context of those works, but then be free to take them and use them to make new art, new culture, new science, new knowledge, right? So this is all kind of basic copyright 101 stuff. So far, so good. So what does this have to do with Google Books, right? And sort of computers? Well, computers are fascinating because you can, using the kinds of methods that you see with search engines like Google Images and Google Books and the Google search engine, text and data mining, computers can take huge collections, or corpora as the lingua franca in that field goes, of in copyright texts and sort of extract or isolate or set free those unprotected elements. So a library contains you know, as I say, sort of thousands or millions of books, but those books contain millions and millions of facts. And you can ask, you know, Google Books, for example, questions about the contents of books, and it can tell you, you know, how many books contain this word. That's just a fact, right? Nobody owns that fact. But in order to tell you that fact, you know, how many books have this word in it, and where are those books, and what are they, and on what page do those words appear? To learn that fact and to tell us that fact, Google had to digitize and process, you know, those millions of books. And so they literally backed up a tractor trailer truck to the University of Virginia Library and other libraries, and we helped them do it, right? Because there's something sort of inherently good about this idea of making the facts that are caught up in our collections easier to find and easier to access. Surfacing knowledge, right? That is what copyright is actually ultimately supposed to do. And so there's a real sense in which Google Books, you know, liberated facts and made it possible to learn new facts that were otherwise impossible to learn by making millions of copies, literal copies of the full text of books. And the HathiTrust now does this, and with the HathiTrust digital corpus and the digital research tools at HathiTrust, you can do extraordinary things in terms of learning facts from books that no human reader could ever do, only because there is this giant collection of books that has been digitized and can be processed in its full text, right? And so I sort of think of these tools as like a way to get the best possible outcome from copyright's bargain, because copyright, of course, is a bargain where we say, well, in a perfect world, all this facts and ideas should be free to everyone. But the way that those facts and ideas are sort of created is by authors and people who do a certain kind of expressive work typically. And we need to give them a chance to sort of sell that work without having to compete with other people who can make copies of their work without having to do the work on the front end of creating it, right? So copyright is a way of kind of giving someone the ability to sell their expressive work, but then ultimately we want the facts and ideas and things that are kind of caught up in that work to be free. And again, I think of these computer tools as really wonderful because the author can still sell their work, right? Like the container that is their exclusive sort of property under copyright, and the thing that they can go out and compete, in the market, that's still protected, right? But the facts which belong to everyone are now easier to find and easier to learn. So this is like a win-win-win, right? But again, on the back end, to make all this work, millions of literal copies had to be made. And so the sort of copyright literalists or copyright maximalists out there said, this is a horrible infringement. We don't want people sort of using this tool instead of going down to the bookstore and sort of buying my book in hopes that they'll find the fact there, right? And so fair use saves the day. Fair use saves the day. And, here, let me back up. Fair use saves the day by saying, look, yes, literally copies are made, right? So Section 106, as Dave said in his presentation, the exclusive rights in Section 106 apply on their face to every act of reproduction. And there's millions and millions of acts of copying that happen on the back end of Google Books. But fair use says, look, those kinds of acts of copying are not the kinds that copyright actually cares about. And it doesn't result in the kind of harm that copyright is meant to prevent. So here's why all of that is relevant, I think, to ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion and this new generation of what people are calling generative AI, or I don't like to use terms like artificial intelligence, but computer generated works, right? So I think, and there I am using it, generative AI does this same kind of magic trick that Google Books did for facts. I think ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion and so on do for things like style, genre, tropes, cliches, grammar, things like that, which are also unprotected, right? Like I can learn how to write like a certain writer or how to draw like a certain artist, and I could be accused of being derivative, but I can't be accused of copyright infringement. Those things are not protected by copyright. And so what generative AI does is sort of separate out, again, even more of the kind of stuff that copyright actually isn't meant to protect by crawling millions of in-copyright books on the back end, right? So again, there's literal copying at a massive scale, but what the result of that is the liberation and sort of utilization of things that are not protected. And I think, again, as sort of stewards of knowledge and culture and style, the library community should embrace that. It should embrace the idea that a tool that can process these sort of millions of works, it may literally involve copying, but of course, fair use is one of fair use's most powerful and sort of paradigm applications is enabling uses that might literally on their face be within the scope of the exclusive rights, but are in fact consistent with copyright's larger purpose. So fair use permits that literal copying involved as a preliminary step in this process. And that's really all I wanted to say. That's the argument I wanted to make, that generative AI may be scary in all kinds of ways, but it's not copyright infringing. And in fact, it's kind of good for copyright purposes.